Hey, it's Pastor Doug here, and I am ready to tell you another Jack tale. Hope that you've been enjoying them as much as I have been enjoying telling them, and that while you're also being a little bit entertained, that you also learn a little bit about the way God might have us live. This is a traditional story called Jack and the Heifer Hide, and so I hope that you enjoy it. So there was this time whenever Jack had gotten a little bit lazy. In fact, he'd gotten so lazy that he just didn't want to work. He didn't want to even play. And his mama had gone on a trip, so it was just he and his brothers, Will and Tom. And since her daddy was already gone working for the king, there was just not a lot to do, at least no one to make them do it. And so while Will continued to work out in the barn and Tom continued to work out in the field, why, Jack decided that since his mama wasn't around and his daddy wasn't around and he didn't feel like doing much of nothing, he did much of nothing. He just lazed around. And pretty soon all the food that his mama had put up for him was gone. And since he wasn't a working out and he wasn't doing anything and just a eating and a consuming, why, he just started getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And as he got bigger, his old clothes just got fuller and fuller. And then he started running out of food. And so he started to losing a little bit of that weight because he just didn't have nothing to eat. But he begged his brothers to give him something. He said, "Oh, Tom, I'm a starving to death." And Tom looked at him and said, "Why, Jack, why, if you'd been working around here like your brother and I might consider a giving you something. But why, you've been doing nothing. And well, when you do nothing, you don't get nothing. Hadn't you learned that yet?" And so Jack started a begging his brother Will. "Oh, Will, please give me something that Mama left for you. I done eat everything of mine." And Will said, "Oh, by Jack, hadn't you noticed that your brother and I have been working every day and we got plenty of food and you just laid around and eat up yours in no time? Why, I'd like to share with you, but I just don't think you deserve getting anything right now the way you just treated yourself and got all lazy and everything. Now, if you was to get to back working again and made that promise, I'd be glad to help you." But Jack, he didn't want to work, and he thought his brothers were being awful mean and horrible to him, and so he just decided that he'd try to figure out something else. And so he took himself a long walk as he was trying to figure out what he'd do to get him something to eat where he didn't have to work so hard. And as he was a-going along, he noticed an old heifer that they'd had out on the pasture way back out there. Why, it was his, and he'd had it for a long time, and his brothers had no say in it. And he looked at that thing and thought, "Oh, there's a lot of good eating on that heifer." And so he just killed it and cut it up and skinned it up, got himself a lot of good beef. And he just started to commence to living off of it. He smoked some of it and he barbecued some of it and he put some in the cold house so he could eat later. His brothers kept right on working and they had plenty of food, and Jack, he just started a-eating and a-eating and a-eating and a-eating and a-eating. In fact, he got so big he just started a-popping his buttons off, and pretty soon his clothes didn't fit him. Why, he'd gotten so big and so round his clothes was just nearly dropping off of him. He couldn't fit on his old ones, didn't have nothing to wear. He just got great and big and round. And in the evening when the light had gone down and the cool came off the mountain, he was getting cold. He wanted some clothes on. And so he just looked around deciding what he might be able to get on himself, and he remembered that old heifer's hide. He'd taken that heifer's hide and had tanned it out and stuffed corn shucks up in it, and sure enough, there it was a-standing there. And so he'd just take that old heifer hide, throw the legs up over the top of him, put it on him like a big old coat, and he'd just try to get warm. But he had gotten so big, that old heifer hide just barely covered him up. Well, his brothers had told him, "Yeah, I'm sorry you're out of food again. You done eat everything that Mama left for you, and now you ate everything that was left from that heifer hide, and you ain't got nothing to eat. I guess it might be time that you just go off and try to seek your fortune somewhere else, because we know that you're in this fix just because you've been lazy and you don't want to work." Why, Jack was offended. He said, "Well, I'll show you. I'll get my fortune. That's what I'll do." And so he just took off down the road. There he was with just a little bit of shorts on, and had that heifer with him. But as he was a-walking, he started to getting too hot. And so he just grabbed it by one of the legs of that hide and just drug it along behind him. He'd come up to the first house he'd got to and said, "Hey, you got any room for someone to come and stay the night?" An old lady come out to the porch and looked out and seen Jack and seen that heifer hide and said, "Oh, law, no, the man of the house isn't around here right now. Why, you just better get on down the road somewhere else, fella." And then he just went on down the road. Why, he come to the next cabin that he'd got up to. He saw the same thing, hollered out, "Hey, you got any space for a fella to spend the night that's a-seeking his fortune? Just one night, I'll be on my way." Lady of the house came out and said, "Oh, no, my husband's not around. No, sirree. You just better get on out of here and get yourself somewhere else where they could put you up while there's still daylight." So Jack just went on. It took him most of the rest of the day to get on down where the next folks lived, and he come up to them and asked the same thing and said, "Hey, you got any room for someone to stay in the night?" And the old woman that come out there said, "Oh, look at you. Why, I don't even know if I could trust you to be in my house. And besides that, my old man ain't home right now, and it's not a good thing for someone to be in with a single woman like I am right now. No, sirree. No, when my man gets back, he'd have all kinds of fits and troubles if someone like you might be in the house." And he says, "Oh, don't blame it on your old man. It's getting late in the evening. I ain't got nowhere to stay. Can't you have compassion for just a night?" "Why, you could just let me stay anywhere you want, and it'd be all right. I just got to get somewhere." So she thought about it and said, "Well, I guess, and since you're in a hard shape, but oh, that heifer hide smells terrible that you're carrying around there. Don't even know why you're dragging it around." He says, "Well, it's about the only thing I got, and I'm sure it'll get me out." She said, "I don't know what that means, but I tell you what, you can get around in the barn and stay up over there." And so sure enough, Jack made his way and got up in the barn, got himself up into the loft, and he opened up so he'd have a little bit of a breeze up there in the top, and he just kind of looked out and see where things was a-going. He noticed that the lights come on in the cabin, and that woman was a-working and a-cooking in there, and so he just kind of made himself at out, and then pretty soon he seen a fella come in. Why, he was wearing a nice suit of clothes, had one of them really nice mustaches, and he had him a beautiful hat on, and Jack thought to himself, "Why, this must be the man of the house. Why, I ought to go up there and make sure that he knows who I am." Why, when he got over there, he just sort of peeked in one of the windows to see what was a-going on, and there was that lady a-sitting down at the table, looking as best as she could, and there was that fella there, and he was a-eating all kinds of good food. And when Jack saw that, his old tummy started a-growling, and he started to-thinking to himself that he hadn't much to eat in a while, and it smelled so good, and he just watched him have all kinds of good victuals. Then you notice that after that she brought out all kinds of good glasses and things. Why, she put out some kinds of drinks that he'd never seen before. Looked like sassafras and some kind of a mint tea and something in there. So he just wanted more and more, but he knew he shouldn't go in. And so he just decided that he'd try to go clean himself up a little bit. And then he'd come back and see if maybe they might give him something through the door, if nothing else. Why, Jack got back up there to where that old heifer hide was, and he was saying, maybe I'll just put it on and then carry it in. And while he was up there, he noticed that there was another fella that started coming up. This one just looked like a regular old farmer like everybody else in that area. And as he started to coming up, he noticed that there was a great big old commotion going on in the cabin. He could see right in down through that window, and sure enough, that woman was grabbing all the victuals off the table, putting all the bottles back up where they belong, taking that fella to run around and trying to hide him somewhere. He even watched where she opened up a chest and put that fella down in it and closed it down on the top of it, just in time for that other fellow to come in. He didn't knock on the door like the first one. In fact, he was just let right on into the house. Jack thought to himself, this is mighty strange. I'm not sure what's going on here, but I ought to figure it all out for myself. And so Jack got down and he went on closer to the cabin and he looked in there. And when he saw, he was close enough where he could hear, and he heard that old fella said, "Oh, woman, it's been a long day. I had a journey all the way into town and got some things sold, and so I got us some things at the store to get us on by a little bit. I know we don't have much around here," but he'd brought back some cornmeal and he brought back a little bit of bacon, and he had some good dried beans so they could have something to eat. He said, "I'm awful hungry from the journey. You got something here that you could get up for me?" Why, she stomped around in the kitchen a little bit, brought him out a few cold potatoes, and had a little bit of old cornbread for him, and then just sat at the other end of the table, just almost glaring at him, like she wasn't real happy with him at all. Well, Jack saw them cold taters, and he thought that sounded better than nothing, and he didn't want to get himself in trouble, and so he went back over to the barn and he knocked over a big old board, and it went clapping down, and when it did, it made enough noise that the fella inside heard it. And he turned to his old woman and said, "Hey, what's that noise out there?" And she said, "Oh, there's a boy coming through here, needed a place to stay, and I put him up in the barn." He says, "Oh, a little boy out there. Well, why don't we invite him in? I don't have much here, but I ought to share with him what I do have. You didn't feed him, did you?" "No, I was saving what little I had for you, honey. I didn't want to give it away." He said, "Well, that was mighty nice of you to take care of your old man like you did, and I sure appreciate sharing with me what little we have." So he went on out there and invited Jack in, and they sat down to the table and they just started eating together. And Jack just come right in, and when he did, he brought that old heifer hide right in with him. The old man looked at him and thought that was the strangest thing, but he just sat that old heifer hide down. It had been so stiff and everything, it just kind of sat there. It had up the head and the horns, and it almost looked like it was a pet or something, but it was just an old heifer hide. Why, Jack sat down and he got him a couple of the cold taters, and he was nibbling a little bit on that cold cornbread, and as he was eating, he told him, "Oh, I sure do thank you for sharing with me. That's real good." And what's that? He stepped on an old heifer hide, and when he did, it crackled, crack, crack, crack. And when it made that noise, then he said, "No, no, no, you'll cause trouble. I'm not going to be saying that. I'm not going to cause trouble between these good folks. You just keep your mouth shut." That old man said, "What are you talking about? What did he hear? What did that thing say to you?" He says, "Oh, I can't tell you. No, sirree. If I were to tell you what that thing told me here, why, it'd make your missus mad, and I don't want her all upset with you. That wouldn't be a good thing." He says, "Oh, you got to tell me what it was. Don't mind her. We're in a good place together. You just let me know where it's at. Tell me what that secret is." He says, "Well, my old heifer hide here is a-telling me that there's some good food in the cupboard, and while you got some good things, why, there's some good meats, and there's some good veggies, and why, there's enough to have a great big old meal here, and not just old cold taters and cornbread." And that old man looked at his wife and says, "Is that so?" And she just looked and said, "Well, I've been saving it up for my kinfolks. They're supposed to stop by at some point, and so I've been putting food back a little at a time so that we'd have something to share when they show up." That old man says, "Well, I'm your kinfolk, and why, Jack here is just as good as kinfolk too, so you ought to get some of that food out and share with us." And so she begrudgingly did, and she brought out some old salted ham that was delicious. She brought out some of those same victuals that she was a-feeding to that fella. And her husband just enjoyed it as good as anything, and so did Jack. He was a-eating right along whenever all of a sudden Jack had put his foot down on that heifer hide, and it being so dried and hard, it went crack, 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 crack. He says, "No, no, no, don't. I already got that woman in enough trouble. Look, she's awful upset with me for giving away her kinfolk food. No, 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 I'm not saying anything like that." That old man says, "What did he say this time? What did he say this time?" He says, "Oh, you're not going to believe it, but he says in the pantry over there in the corner that has usually all the stuff in there for cleaning up the chimney, that there's some pies and tarts and some really good desserts." And he just looked at his old woman and said, "Is that true?" She says, "I told you I was trying to just keep up a few things from my kinfolk." He says, "Oh, well, I'm your kinfolk, and so is Jack now. Why, you just get out some there and share a little bit with us." And so she brought it out, and they had a great dessert. Why, Jack had never tasted anything like it. She was a pretty good cook. And as they was finishing it up, Jack stepped on that old heifer hide again, and it went crack-crack-crack, crack-crack-crack. "No, no, no. You look at that old woman. She's awful mad at me giving away her kinfolk. No, I'm not going to get, no, no, no." But that old man was saying, "What did it say, Jack? What did it say? You got to tell me now. You can't leave me in suspense like this. I just got to know." And he says, "Well, okay, but don't blame me if it gets your old woman even madder than she is now." He goes, "Oh, don't worry about her. It's going to be okay. It'll probably be a long time for her kinfolk show up." He says, "Well," he says, "that over there down by the creek house, there's all kinds of good things to drink. Kinds of teas and all kinds of stuff." And he looked at his old woman and says, "Is that true?" She says, "Well, I told you I was trying to store up for my kinfolk to come by, but yeah, there are a few things over there." And she brought them out, and sure enough, there was some sassafras tea, and there was some ginger drinks, and they had all kinds of things. There was even some blackberry wine. Why, and that old man found that, he just started sipping it up himself. He didn't offer any to Jack, thinking he was too young of a fella to be drinking something like that. And as he did, it started making him feel a little bit better. He says, "Oh, I tell you what, your kinfolk are going to love it when they show up. All this good food that you got left for them. Why, there's no telling how much they'd show their love for you." And I just imagine that I'd never even known about it if it wasn't for that old heifer hide that Jack has there. Seems like it's some kind of a magic heifer hide. In fact, boy, I know you're on your way. I just can't let it go without me getting it from you. How much do you want for it?" Jack says, "Oh, I couldn't possibly sell it to you. No, no, no." He says, "Well, I ain't got much money, but I could give you a little bit. What I've got's a few coins from the king, and I could give you a few silver ones and a couple of gold ones, but that's all I got. But with something like that around here, it might keep me and my missus on the right page together." Jack says, "Oh, no, can't take it, can't take it. Why, even what you have wouldn't even be enough." He says, "Well, I could throw something else into the bargain. You just name anything in this house and I'd give it to you." Jack says, "Well, I don't want to take all of your money. Why, if you just give me the silver coins, that'd be enough with that old chest over there. Why, I'd take that chest and the silver and I'd give you the heifer hide." Why, that old man thought it was a great deal, but as soon as Jack suggested it, his old lady started jumping in. "Oh, you can't give away that chest. No, sirree. Why, that chest has been in my family for generations and generations. My great-grandfather gave it to his son, who gave it to his son, who gave it to his cousin, who passed it to his aunt, who gave it to her sister, who gave it to her niece, who gave it to her sister's niece, and that sister was my sister, and it came to me. And why, it's it's precious in my family and I can't give it away. No, 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 we just can't do it. Why, that old man looked at him and says, why, there's nothing of the sort. I remember when we got that old chest. It didn't belong to no part of the family. I don't know what you're talking about. Why, Jack can have that old thing. In fact, with this heifer hide, we'd probably get us something even better. And so he made the deal right there with Jack, and Jack took that old casket of a chest because it had that feller in it, and he knew, and he just said, well, in the morning, I'll just get on out with it, but why don't I just take it now and get it out of here, and that way, when I leave early in the morning, you won't have to worry about me. That old man didn't mind, and so he took the heifer hide, and Jack, why, he took that old casket of a basket of a chest and started dragging it out. He got it out the door and it went clunk, 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 and then he started dragging it out the barn, clack, 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 and he started pushing it right on out. Why, he just tugged and he pushed and he pushed and he tugged, and he started dragging that thing right on down the road right then. Why, he made it down the road and down a ravine, and that old fella just kept banging at it and says, oh, you got to let me out of here, you got to let me out of here. And Jack was saying, oh, I can't just let you out of there. No, sirree. You got anything that you might give me, and I might think about letting you out? And that old said, oh, I got some guineas here from the far country, and you could use that as good as cash around here. And he says, well, how many you got? He goes, oh, I got at least a whole pocket full at them. And so Jack stopped and he says, well, poke them out of this crack and we'll see. And so that fella started pushing them out. Why, pretty soon Jack had a whole handful of silver coins. He just took them all together and he put them in his pocket, and he says, well, that was pretty good, but I don't know if I want to let you go too close to the house. I'm afraid you might go back there. Why, that wouldn't be no good for no one. Why, the best I could tell you is getting right in the middle of that old man and that old woman together, and they ought to be themselves together without someone like you in the middle of it. You is causing all kinds of trouble. He says, oh, if you let me out of here, I won't go back there. I promise. He says, well, that's a pretty good promise, but what about somewhere else? I'm not going to let you out if you're just going to go somewhere else and get between another old man and his old lady. No, sirree. And so Jack just grabbed that box and kept clunking and clunking and clunking and clunking it. And that fella hollered out again, oh, you just got to let me go. I won't go to nobody's house. I won't ever do that again. And Jack says, oh, that's a good promise. Sure is a good promise, but I don't know about it. I'm afraid if I can trust you or not. If I let you go, you just might make your way to the next house. And so Jack just pulled it on a little further, and he got to a little bit of a cliff right by the old river, and you could hear it rushing and running by. And he said, well, I don't know. I might just push this whole casket right down in the river and see where it takes you. Why, that'd be kind of an interesting thing to see. Why, it might take you down there and go over the waterfalls, and why, that'd be quite a crash, and I'd love to see something like that. That'd be pretty neat to see. And that old fellow was panicking on the inside. Oh, please, 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 please let me out of here. Why, don't let that happen to you. I promise I never will get involved with another old man's lady. I'll stick to myself, and I'll stick to my own, and I'll get on clean out of this part of the country if you just let me out of here. Jack thought about it for a while, and he decided, well, I guess I can't just get rid of you on my own, even though that's kind of what I want to do. And I'll be honest, if that old man had found you instead of me, you might not be alive to even tell the tale. You better watch yourself. In fact, you ought to keep your own promise to me to your own self. So Jack let him out, and when he got out, he got up and he took off and he went to running. And Jack never seen him in that part of the world again. Now Jack, he went on back the next day and got back to home. And when he did, he put out all of them silver coins on the table that he had seen, and his brothers Will and Tom couldn't believe it. Oh, but dads, they said, I can't believe you, Jack. How did you get a wealth like that whenever you're such a lazy boy? And Jack says, well, you're awful right there. I have been lazy, that's true. And I did get quite a fortune, that's great. And when Mama and Dad get back, they'll be able to take this and live for a long time without having to work. But you know what? I got to missing around here and all the stuff I was a doing, and so we're just going to put this aside until they come back, and until then, I'm just going to get to doing all the things that I should have been doing all along. I'll get my end of the chores done if, well, you share with me a little bit of what you got." And Will and Tom promised they would, and they got together just fine. And after they got together, it wasn't too long until their mama come back, and when she seen all the extra money they had, she couldn't believe it. She says, "Oh, law, this will keep us through the whole winter, and even maybe a little further. Why, this is one of the blessed days we've ever had together." And that's the end of that. Now, I tell you that story, and I hope that you already figured out why, because the scriptures tell us that whenever someone is a pleading and asking for forgiveness, we really ought to extend it. Not just once or twice, but every time. And sometimes it's kind of hard to trust people, but we ought to let them go and forgive them just like our Heavenly Father has forgiven us. Because every one of us has got our own problems, no matter how we try to cover them up. But with the grace of forgiveness, we can move ourselves to a better spot so that we can live as we should under God's rule and authority and power that comes to us through His mighty grace. And that's the end of that.